And welcome back to another episode of the Talk Past podcast. Just don't say that too many times the same way. Today we are talking about padded armor, or otherwise known as the Gambeson, a form of armor made of quilted cloth, usually, throughout history. So obviously I am the host, NC.
Wrap me up and call me a burrito. I am Red Iron Riot, aka the War Queen.
Per usual. So let's just get into it. So what I mentioned literally before we just talked is that there isn't very much, at least off the top of your head, off the top of like the internet, much information on Gambesons. Apart from like a wiki page and a little bit of discussion from other reenactors.
Actually, I was going to say, right now, as of recording this, the first thing that pops up when you search for padded armor is a wiki page for Valheim. So, I mean, take that as you will.
I think maybe because it's padded armor is often associated with video games and games in general, like D&D. In D&D, it's called padded armor as opposed to a Gambeson, which is what we would call it.
Well, it's just there's actually an item that is padded armor that's made with linen and iron, which is super. So it's like, and I think a few entries down, there's a D&D Beyond entry. So it's a lot of not historical entries, unless you go. I guess you look for shopping, you'll probably find a little more relevant.
Exactly.
Now, it's kind of hilarious.
Of course, I'm sure there's books, stuff like that, things that we obviously could have looked at, but just time and money. But anywho, looking at trying to find where this thing started, this is like the most basic form of armor that I know individuals like us use, but as well as actually used in history.
Or used in history, and that people in reenactment should be using more if they don't already.
Oh, indeed. We use it like gold, or gold as if it was currency.
Yeah, you say that, but it's Florida, so what we're using is more. I think I see a lot more leather in our group than straight up padded armor.
We do, and that definitely needs to be a discussion, but especially a discussion to me. Because I mean, I've mentioned before, and it'll be a recurring gag on the channel. Like, I wear a lot of leather when it comes to the shows that we do. Like, I have my leather suede
dragon face.
A suede leather tabard, a leather jacket.
Now, totally. To be said, there is a historical use for leather cuirass. I think it's called the buff coat. And that came way later, and like, after the 17th century, I think.
Right.
Like it's actually, I was thinking about this because it's mentioned in the Lilliput chapter of Gulliver's Travels that he's wearing one, and that's when he's being attacked by the Lilliputians while he's tied down. His buff coat repels a lot of their spears, so it's like, oh, hey,
yeah, exactly. Like, we in our group probably use way too much leather, which is really not prevalent in medieval history. There's some evidence to leather armor, give or take, but really not solid. However, something that is very prevalent in history, even as far as the 4th century, back in the Scythian times, which has no relation to Scyther from Pokemon. Basically Greek. It is quilted armor, which is what a Gambeson is. It's often made of linen or cotton, stuffed with linen wool.
Right, because I think cotton is mostly a Middle Eastern thing for this type of armor.
Yeah, it's used, but it's a different region. But things will be stuffed in there like wool, such as like horse hair, anything that you kind of can put in there. That'll be something of a barrier for a weapon to go through. And go ahead.
I was going to say, before we go too far, it's like, so the terms we have, the overarching term is padded armor. and a couple other terms. There's also the gambeson, a padded gambeson, which I believe the gambeson is kind of like is its own overarching for like tunic armor.
Yeah.
And then there's also a ketan, which, according to the etymology section of the wiki, comes from the Arabic word for cotton.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really neat because it's like, okay, well, if this is the case, then this is probably where, seeing padded armor in Middle Eastern, which I couldn't find a lot of sources on just with in my first search, which is really weird. But so there's a bunch of different terms. Like I said, we have padded armor, gambeson, the ketan. There's also padded jack and the arming doublet.
Yeah, the doublet. Which a lot of the information regarding the gambeson tends to pop up around the 13th century, 1300s. Obviously, more so in the 14th and 15th. That's when I think it got more popular when you're wearing it under your armor, like a hauberk or a cuirass, plate, whatever, chainmail. But let's discuss it in terms of relation of it on itself, because padded armor is like the magic armor. That's something that really is, I think, in all honesty, it's better than leather armor. Because leather armor is just dried flesh that really doesn't stop anything. Whereas padded armor is super effective against arrows. It's really effective against swords, especially medieval swords. Medieval swords were made of iron, usually, and weren't really that great in terms of material and make. Not as good as obviously we have it now, where we've got mild to high carbon steel. Everything is like razor sharp.
What's that part? What's that one part out of cars that everybody's like, you can make swords out of this easy. It's like you can make a sword out of a leaf spring, no problem if you needed to. I'm like, yeah, but it sucks.
I mean, you can make a sword out of anything, pretty much.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, you're right. Is that the gambeson, the padded gambeson, is actually a really versatile piece of equipment as a piece of armor. It, like you said, arrows. So there's a piece of equipment, samurai equipment called the horo, which is if you've seen a samurai riding and you see the little parachute thing behind him, that's the horo. And I remember I really enjoyed it because History Channel did a special on it once, and it's like they actually tested it against arrows, and they were able to show, here's the fabric dispersing the energy from the arrow and basically stopping the arrow from hitting the samurai. So the gambeson works in that similar way, is that the fabric disperses the energy of the hit and stops the arrow from piercing, and similar with just being hit by a sword. Also, as we mentioned, it's usually stuffed of different materials, and it's basically, it's harder to, pair.
Well, let's quickly divulge then a little bit in terms of the make. Obviously, we mentioned like a fabric and the kind of thing you'd find in it, but very specifically as a source of what I'm going to talk about is there's a documentary, How to Build a 13th Century Castle, Secrets of the Castle.
Is that the one where they're building the castle by hand?
Exactly.
Oh, I really got to say that.
Yep, you're going to find this on YouTube. And obviously, it's mostly about building a 13th century French castle. However, there are episodes where they delve into the actual life that would be around the castle, not just building it, but the people that would make it, the things that you would have in terms of defense. So one of those little takeaways is they present the gambeson, padded armor. I'm not sure what the material is that you used it, because it was a while that I watched it. So probably linen or wool. But the individual that wears it, it's very thick, that he wears it. So there's different levels of thickness depending on how you pad it. Of course, the more padded, obviously the more defense you have from an incoming arrow. But I mean, that's basically quilted armor. So you're gonna kind of look like the Michelin Man, or like a quilted blanket kind of thing. It depends on the pattern of the seamstress that you or tailor, I should say, or armorer, whichever would make it, that you commission. But effectively, the idea is a sword is not going to go through it, and if so, it's going to basically cut open the first layer, but then you're going to have all this layer of usually wool or thick horsehair, which if anybody has any experience in regards to dealing with wool itself, trying to get through wool is near impossible. And then no, it is, and then of course it's thick. It's not something that's particularly form fitting like chainmail.
Nope.
You were wearing something that's gonna fit more like those metal plates where you get like a CAT scan, and you gotta wear that like lead armor. So it's something that you're gonna hopefully have made for you, so it's easier. But it's a bulky armor. It's something that's not form fitting, but it is still versatile in terms of you get some movement. But really, the main objective is you are basically getting the best at the time, the best defense for your money, for your army. And I literally believe that more people need to know about padded armor, need to be using padded armor in reenactments, and in D&D, padded armor needs to be worth more defense points than leather, because that is a shame. But yeah, no, it's a very thick linen armor, quilted, Michelin Man, just kind of going over what I just said. But it really, I mean, if you watch that documentary, they make everything by hand. So they go through the process of making it. I don't think they make the linen on the show, but they make the armor itself.
Right. You hear that, wizards? We're coming for you.
Exactly. And I'm not 100% if they test it out, if they're actually testing out the armor itself. I think they do. My guess, normally when people are testing out, such as us, who do medieval reenactment, we're using a sword, and we're desperately trying not to damage anything because we pay a lot of money for it.
Yeah.
But people that otherwise on YouTube, which whatever is a variety of us, have more of an ability to just go at it and show you. And I'd like to do this on the channel once we get back to live action stuff, how it really reacts to. I don't think it's as good in terms of finding period weapons, because a lot of the weapons today are made of better material and better hand craftsmanship. But how it reacts to certain weapons that they would have had back then in the 13th century and on, as well as, most importantly, I think padded armor, the best use is a defense for arrows.
Right. It's that same thing where it's all that cloth is providing a buffer for the force from the arrow hitting, dispersing it, and stopping it from piercing, which is really cool to watch. If you watch what's the a computer model of that force just spreading out.
It's a lot. It reminds me a lot like, to an extent, ballistics gel. Ballistics gel isn't going to stop a lot of this stuff because it's gel, right?
Yeah.
But something like that. But more so this space age, I want to say aerogel.
Yeah, I think that's it.
It's the gel that they're using in currently in our atmosphere, just beyond where our junk layer is, to pick up the trash. Basically, in space, what happens is objects are moving in space pretty fast. I mean, if you were up in space, even the International Space Station gets dinged by space junk on a daily basis.
Right.
But that stuff, if that hits you, it could be deadly. But the space aerogel catches it almost like magic, and it just stops it like dead in its track. And that is what padded armor or Gambeson does. It just the padding inside, depending on the maker, hopefully they did well enough. But usually the padding is going to be so thick and the material is so good, like horsehair or wool or whichever is used, more linen, so on and so forth, whatever, is padded enough and full enough that it is just going to stop a sword, or obviously more specifically an arrow, just dead in its track. And if it even gets beyond that final layer of fabric of the gambeson itself, usually you're maybe just gonna get like a bruise, maybe a tiny cut, or maybe it still won't even go through. It'll just be like a nice comfortable prick.
I think I think the most you would get is some bruising. And this is where you find why they continue to use the gambeson under chainmail and under plate mail, because even if the I'm sorry, I keep losing the words. Even if the piercing, even if you lose the piercing protection because you've got the plate over it, and that's much better. That again, those layers and that buffer continues to absorb the hits from swords and maces and blunt weapons that metal armor really can't help you with.
Exactly.
And I was gonna go on. Personally, what I think people should be using more padded armors, because it provides what I want to call like one of those really good medieval the look.
Yes, because
and
it is.
This is actually one of the problems. I think one of the problems with finding information on the padded gambeson is that in art, the padded gambeson, the brigandine, and lamellar armor, they're all kind of, they feel like they're visually interchangeable, especially in Middle Eastern depictions, because they would use not just padded armor, but they'd also use lamellar, which the quilted look of padded armor, it's like, oh, it's a bunch of squares, right? Yeah, we're good. So while the Wikipedia, like especially the Wikipedia article, doesn't say, hey, it's like, here's this sultanate horseman with wearing full padded armor. There's no other information in its history beyond like that in the Middle East, and like that's pretty weak. Wiki, come on.
Yeah, no. If you look up padded armor or medieval gambeson, typically you're going to find reenactment material, which is, I mean, really, it is as is, right? But there's very rare instances, at least if you're going to look it up on the internet or so, of like museum pieces. When I want to look up something in terms of medieval armor as it was for us to talk about here, I want to look up museums, how museums are going to be displaying it, whether it's accurate or not in terms of where, but you still have the material, the actual material that somebody back then wore on display. But typically, otherwise, in art, which medieval art, hilarious as it is terrible. Right? Especially if it's that embroidery.
Saddle up, boys. We're gonna go fight some snails.
Yeah, like embroidery. It's just terrible. Like medieval paintings that like the nobles get done is so like much better. But yet, if you have like, if the king decrees or the church this gets like embroidery, everybody looks flat and weird, and all medieval art tends to look the same. So like it could be brigandine, but it looks like a general surcoat. It could be padded armor, but it looks like a brigandine or a doublet, and it's like, what is what? So it's kind of weird finding something that's a historical point of reference for padded armor that isn't beyond just what we already know and use and try out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so I'm gonna. This is always, it's an odd source to go to, but there are some really good sources for it. Historical wargaming miniatures. There are a lot that are just really fantastic with their design and how close they are to what you would actually see. when we were doing Viking Year and I was looking up references for Viking shields, a lot of references I got were from medieval wargaming because it's like these dudes care about authenticity. So
which is strange because that's not something we normally get in entertainment. You know, like in entertainment mediums, you're gonna get a lot of basically a lot of leather armor, which is dumb. You know, you look
yeah,
at Game of Thrones, anything Viking, it's gonna be nothing but leather. But usually, Gambeson's padded armor is done well enough or accurately. Like I know the Gambesons in Game of Thrones are fine, but yeah, no, it's kind of hard not to mess that up or to mess it up. Sorry.
right. Hold on. That's actually I keep forgetting. I forgot it. So one of the big companies that I want to mention with the miniatures is Perry Miniatures. They do a lot of historical miniatures for wargaming. And of course, you've got your usual, there's Napoleonic and World War II, because those are some of the big ones, but they're just some of their medieval lines. They're just even not just the miniatures themselves, but the artwork they commission for the boxes. It's real fantastic. It's also like it's on the level of the guy who does the Men at Arms books, or these just really lovely illustrations of what I want to say are accurate depictions. And here let me send you a link.
Oh no, I'm actually looking at it right now. I'm on the website.
And like I personally was gonna say Bretonians because the Bretonian Men at Arms figures, their armor is definitely supposed to be padded gambesons, and you've got different styles going straight up and down across and diamond patterned quilting. But man, Perry miniatures are really just on another level when it comes to realism, and they're honestly a really good source that I feel gets overlooked when you're looking for if you're looking for a reference.
Oh yeah. Also should mention, because I'm seeing that in their figures as well. We're not sponsored by them, but anyhow.
No, but hey, hey Perry, I love your miniatures. You're just British and way too expensive to get in bulk. I'm sorry.
But we should mention also padded armor actually also started off. We mentioned bulky, kind of hard to put on and such, but also it doesn't really get like easy to wear until the later medieval period. If you start getting into the 14th century, 15th century, that's when I think they started putting like buttons and openings in the front
that made around it the armpits more
like,
and
made it more like I guess, something you'd put on under your armor,
right,
as opposed to as armor itself. But back then, I think
also that time period, it was beginning to transition to you've got your infantry gambeson that somebody would wear just as their armor, and then you start having the versions that are going under chainmail and plate mail and everything.
Yeah, I'd actually be curious to look at some actual historical images in museums if I can find some. I found one. One of them has a very old gambeson, which is being worn, showcased, I should say, underneath. The back is open, and it shows the chainmail over it on the sides, basically shoulders down, and then from the front, which is very, very usual. If you're not wearing the gambeson itself, typically it was worn underneath chainmail because you get that double layer of protection. But I'd be curious to see in terms of make, because things get perfected over time or worsened over time in terms of model. But the early gambesons, at least the ones that are showcased in the documentary from the 13th century castle making, and then beforehand that I've noticed, are very bulky. They're very thick. They're very hard to work with in terms of body isolations. But I'd be curious if the material started to get less and less protective as you went by and they started to sort of skimp on it. The more that you relied heavily on chainmail, pieces of plate, and then eventually full plate. Because obviously we do medieval combat, not necessarily reenactment, but we do medieval combat and stage combat, medieval Western martial arts, HEMA to an extent.
Well, what I would also say is that possibly it's not just the materials getting better; it's also the crafters getting better. And I mean, we see this, and we see as the fashion progresses. You got people doing cooler, weirder things with fabric. I'm sure that definitely would have translated over to, hey, I've got to make this huge freaking jacket. Is there any way you can make this better? Sure.
Yeah. And my train of thought is making it less of a protective armor and something more for like when you see us using it, something that when you take your armor off, your actual armor off from chainmail to plate, it's something that's more breathable, something that you can move easier in, something that you're not going to be killing yourself in the sun.
Which is why we don't wear it in Florida very much.
Right. But also in any sort of environment where you're fighting, you're going to be getting a lot of body heat and a lot of heat from people around you. So I'm wondering if it just kind of got better or cheaper over time to accommodate the armor, but also to accommodate the needs of not wearing such a bulky, heavy material when you're also fighting in basically an oven of plate armor.
Oh boy. I really wish that they did, like, History Channel did shows like that, like Deadliest Warrior again, because it felt like those shows gave it impetuous to, hey, let's figure this, hey, let's figure this out. Hey, let's figure this out. How does this work? Woof. And then now it's just Pawn Stars.
Yeah, no, looking at our Gambesons, I have a Gambeson, although mine's a cheat. Mine is very specifically meant to be used under armor. Which I actually have to repair. But I see the Gambesons that our group has been wearing, and it's been very much not strictly like it would have been then. I think it's more of just the fabric and like a very light padding.
Well, and that's also something to consider if you're a reenactor and you're on a budget. The quilted fabric that you can find at Joann's and Michael's and whatnot, with one layer of that with a couple yards of bias tape, you've got a pretty decent looking representation of padded armor.
Yeah, you could say it's the quilted quicker arrow stopper padding.
You are lucky you are not within driving distance. Oh, that hurts. That hurt. Why did you do that?
I am a bounty hunter.
Oh, God. Oh, boy.
I'd like to see some of us wear like historical 13th century padded for once. See what that's like and really just kind of test it. I would honestly, well, I don't know. Maybe not with some of our people, but I'd be interested in on the channel testing out actually using padded armor in a historical setting in terms of taking an arrow or taking a sword, not an axe. I don't think an axe is going to be stopped much. In all honesty, I think an axe obviously you have more weight at the top with the axe, obviously.
A little more leverage.
The words this time. The point of gravity is that axe head, and that's coming down. And that I think, I don't know. I think the heavier the swing, or maybe the bulkier the person, it might go through. But maybe someone like me, I'm a smaller person. I'm not very strong, in all honesty. I can lift like 70 pounds. So maybe if I were to do it on historical, like thick 13th century and less padded armor, probably wouldn't go through. But I think maybe an axe is probably the best thing to use against padded armor.
I would agree with that, just because again, you mentioned is the design of how an axe is supposed to work compared to a European style broadsword, which is more of a. This is like, so do you ever see that one video where they take a broadsword and they bust the heck out of a katana with it?
Yeah.
And it's like that's not the point of either of those weapons, though. Like
Yeah.
European warfare and armor, kind of it was not finesse. It was brute hack and slash. It was
Yeah.
beating
I
the
mean,
other man to death with an iron stick, basically.
I mean, yeah, and defense. I mean, like when we talk about in terms of protection here, we're not talking about modern day swords. If the group of us, which is about 30 or so people, and that's just the fighters themselves, if all of us had all of our modern weapon and modern armor and went back in time and took out whoever, um, whether it's like the Battle of Agincourt or the Viking era, we would just obliterate the entire field. They did not have, I mean, obviously, give or take, right? Give or take.
Yeah, give or take. Give or take.
We would have better equipment, but they would have horses. We don't have horses.
Yeah,
But
we don't have.
our swords today are made so precisely, whereas back in the day they did not have very good materials. The materials for making swords were very poor, and usually the sword quality equaled the source material, which no matter how good the blacksmith is, an iron sword is still an iron sword. You know, so this obviously is the best defense against, say, a medieval sword, a medieval arrow. But I think maybe not so much a medieval axe or pole arm, something that's going to have more force coming down, especially a pole arm if you're on horseback, or you can really just drive that thing with both hands, as opposed to, I mean, you can get some speed and range with an arrow. Like I said, it could probably still go through it, but I think an arrow is going through that wool and horsehair is going to be a little bit more difficult. But
so here's what I would say.
If it was today, no, we would just obliterate whatever they had.
In terms of tactics and equipment, we would have the upper hand, but on the other side of that, their physicality and their training would probably be a good counterweight.
Absolutely, especially if they were horseback. If they were horseback, we'd be done. We would absolutely be done unless we brought guns, and that's cheating.
Yeah, it kind of defeats the point.
Yeah, but no. I mean, we obviously don't have the training that they do. Maybe someone that does HEMA regularly might be better off. We, of course, do stage combat. We do HEMA as well, but it's not used as extenuously in what we do. I think our HEMA use is more for fun because we love medieval history.
Yeah.
But I think if you took probably our best person, gave them modern weapons and armor, and put them up against someone of equivalence in, say, 900 to 13th to 15th century. It depends on the scenario, but I think we would win the fight. But if it was horseback, they would win it.
Yeah. Oh man, it's. I guess it's kind of the time where we veer off, because there's, as much as you gotta love padded armor, the look, how actually functional it is. There's just really not much you could say about it except, hey, it works, yo.
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely padded armor is like, and I'm going off of like Robin Williams here, but I remember watching like Robin Williams films when he would ever take off his clothes in terms of like his shirt and stuff. He would take off like a coat or like a whatever he's had on top. There's always like a white shirt underneath. I don't know if that was something of the time, where they would always have like an underwear sort of shirt kind of thing, and it was always like a white shirt, whatever. But that's kind of what padded armor is, or became. Basically, padded armor is your base. That's your broth, right? That's where you start, and then you begin to assemble your armor from there. Like your lightsaber, you're gonna start with your base, and then you're gonna start constructing it from there. So usually either, I think really the best look is like a gambeson, just on its own, or gambeson and chainmail. I think that to me is like the best, most medieval sort of representation of padded armor.
Yeah, personally, I like Gambeson under partial plate, just because you still get that cool look of the plate with the functionality of the Gambeson. And then we're also, when you're thinking of padded armor, it goes just beyond the tunic Gambeson. There's also the chausses, which are armor that go over the thighs, which are very prevalent. And if you look at fully armored plate warriors, you'll see that a lot of them are wearing these pieces on their legs usually above the knee. You can see it.
Yeah.
And there's also, I think you see it you see it a lot with crossbow men, is that they'll have their helmets and they'll have that whole hood and neck part that's padded. That's a padded piece of padded armor. And it's hard to understate just how much padded armor can really make this really cool silhouette for a medieval soldier.
Yeah.
Or a medieval fighter.
You also see it in bracers. There's also padded helm wear, head protection. And so, I mean, it's really versatile. You could put it anywhere. You can wear it on anywhere. Horses.
Like, I actually remember for Cressy year when I was an archer, my big piece of armor was a vest that was a padded vest. That was actually, thinking back on it, it was actually a very comfortable piece of equipment.
Yeah,
and it looked really neat.
Yeah, no, mine is a cheat. Obviously, I've got the padded sleeves and collar, but the actual shirt portion is just linen.
Mm-hmm. And then I think like if you look through examples, and especially in shopping searches, you'll see that there's evolutions of Gambesons where it's like, okay, well, there's like the main part of it is this cloth, and now they've started sewing bits of chain into like the sides and the armpits for extra protection. So and especially when you start getting to wearing plate armor, the Gambeson became really integral beyond armor because it had all the little straps and ties to put that plate armor on.
Yeah. No, it gets extra and extravagant, and pretty much like everything else. There's variations of it. I like the simple Gambeson where it's just the shirt. That to me is my favorite. Usually if it's kind of look at like the Michelin stripes, I like that.
I personally like the diamond quilting pattern just because it's very visually. I feel it's very, very visually striking.
Yeah, either or really. I prefer the rectangles, only because I don't know why. To me, it looks either going up or down. Across or vertical. It looks very sort of medieval. And then in terms of like time frame, it looks like more like 900s to me, whether it is or not, whatever. Whereas the diamond pattern, the square patterns tend to look a little bit more 13th century.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if there's any basis to that, in all honesty, in terms of like patterning, but because obviously the cross was being used in 13th century too. But just the visual perspective is kind of where that brings me.
I could see it. Oh, so yeah. I guess the long story short of this: wear more Gambesons, man.
Yeah, they're much more protective than D&D will have you think.
They're much more like they are accessible. Like if you can't even get just the quilted fabric, if you have the time and you have the desire, you can take just some basic linen, whatever you're using, and you can sew those patterns in yourself. It'll work.
Exactly. And you can pad it with pretty much anything. Obviously historically was horsehair, more linen, cotton, wool. But if you're LARPing and you want to be modern, you can put some Lego bricks in there. That way, if your opponent comes over and tries to step on you,
oh no,
they'll take damage.
Just walking around, shick.
Mm-hmm.
That's so bad. Oh, so any other closing thoughts? Because I think this is as far as we can go with this one.
Yeah, I think we're kind of running in circles now. Not necessarily. I mean, that's pretty much it. I wish there was more historical reference that you can find off the top of your head in terms of the internet. I wish I wish there was more information readily available, besides just historical volumes or going to a museum. And even then, you can't touch the stuff at the museum.
Yeah.
I wish there was more information. I wish there was more tactile, just readily available info that you can gather about a lot of medieval armor that you just can't get from pictures, that you just can't get from Wikipedia pages or a book or watching someone's YouTube video.
I wonder if that would be like a fun sort of thing to have at a fair. So you ever been to a county fair and they have that whole setup where it's like, hey, you could take an old, dress up and take an old timey Western picture.
Yeah.
Just something like that, except with medieval armor.
Yeah, kind of have someone make armor of for kids, for teens, for adults, and then sort of, hey, here's a picture looking like a medieval hooer or whatever.
Like I feel like that would be something that would be popular because there's looking at armor and saying, hey, that's cool armor, and then there's getting a chance to try it on. Also, yeah. For some reason I have a mental image of a little kid in a big overstuffed Gambeson, just hey, try this on, go run around, see how it feels, and just bouncing off a wall.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Hey kid, your dad died in Agincourt, but hey, the doublet he died in's now yours. You better get ready with your sword. You'll be training tomorrow.
Don't worry about the stains. It's fine.
That won't wash out.
Actually, it makes me wonder. Is could you design a Gambeson that would have the outer shell of untreated wool, so it still has all the lanolin on it, and then the interior shell, the interior part's regular linen. Would that be I wonder how that would work.
Interesting. I think that's something that we could try on the channel once we get back to us and live action.
Getting that wool would be hard though. Ugh.
Yeah.
But I mean, the idea of it is something I like to try and bring to when it comes to preparing for fairs and doing armor.
But no, that is a good point. I think that may be something we should bring up, whether it gets used or not. But I think it is very important for people who don't know or don't really delve into historical stuff regularly to be able to touch it, to be able to feel it, to be able to wear it, to be able to see what it's actually like in chainmail, in padded armor, see what it's actually like holding an iron sword, not the modern swords, but an iron sword. See what it actually feels like in a setting that is practical. That's what I want to do with the channel, not have people touch our stuff, but actually present this to all of you guys in a practical cinematic setting where we want to test these actual medieval items, tailors, blacksmithing, armor, fighting, whatever scenarios, and actually do it in a practical setting that they would have done it back then, and see how it works out in that scenario. I think it's important to actually see it done and feel it in a proper manner,
and be involved.
That brings you back
and be involved in it. It's a different learning experience that you can't get just by reading and looking at pictures, which is
it's a different scenario when you're going to the zoo and you're seeing them behind glass. It's a different scenario when you're looking at them on YouTube and seeing all the cute little cats and stuff. It's a completely different story when someone brings an animal to your class, or you get to encounter the animal in a safe environment where you can actually touch and see it up close and how life really is. Same setting in terms of history. It's so much different when you're able to walk through an actual medieval castle. It's so much different when you're able to actually experience actual historical items, either accurate to the time or the actual items. So I think that's pretty much it in terms of content to discuss with the Gambeson, because there really isn't too much aside from our experience and beyond jokes. So we'll go ahead and wrap that up. So this has been an episode of the Talk Pest podcast again. And of course, I'm NC with a guest host,
Red Iron Right, aka the War Queen. And hopefully, I think we said this is probably the first in a series of armor. We're we do padded armor first, and we're gonna go to chainmail, and then we're gonna go to plate mail, and
There's so much armor,
probably
and we
there
should go
is.
through all of it. I mean, we use all of it. So
Yeah.
I'd like to discuss it all. So yeah,
Yeah.
until then, we will see you next time.
Goodbye.
Rabble dabble.